We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisades Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Wojcicki. Joining me today is Chris Grove, President and Director of Commerce Resources. Thanks for joining me today, Chris.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you and to be able to talk some rare earths with you today. So why don't we start by kind of jumping into that? Your company is really focused on rare earth metals. So why don't we start by defining what rare earths are and what they're used for and why they're so important?
Thank you, Tom. Happy to talk about rare earth elements. The rare earth elements themselves are really 17 different commodities. And there are different technologies that different rare earth elements are essential for. But let me break that group down into two categories right at the beginning here. And so the ones that are most important to the market right now are the four rare earth elements that are essential for the manufacture of permanent magnets. And it is those permanent magnets then that are essential to almost every electric motor manufactured. And then those electric motors would be found in everything from your electric toothbrush to your Dyson vacuum cleaner, to your leaf blower, to your Tesla or any electric vehicle, or wind turbines. Wind turbines are a huge demand area for rare earth elements. Leaving that category of those four rare earth elements, and I'm happy to name them as well. But the other category that is of a very significant market percentage for rare earth elements, those are two rare earth elements that are essentially used in the service of the internal combustion engine. So you have the four over on this side that are used to, power electric vehicles and wind turbines, clean and green world. And then on the other side, you have these two very big markets for two of the lowest priced rare earth elements. But the markets are huge because still, say, for example, in 2020, in North America, at least, in terms of the market that was most saturated or where they had the highest adoption of electric vehicles, California, still 80% of the vehicles bought in 2020 were internal combustion engine vehicles. So that's only 20% were EVs. But in terms of those two rare earth elements, those would be cerium and lanthanum. And so in the service of the internal combustion engine. So cerium is used to make catalytic converters, which, ever since arguably Ralph Nader, we've needed in our internal combustion engine vehicles. And secondly, lanthanum is essential to then process oil into gasoline. So cerium and lanthanum are two very big markets, arguably still because that market, the automobile buying public, is still dominated by internal combustion engine vehicles, at least in North America. But everyone can see the growing numbers and the fact that Tesla, I think, is the highest valued car company right now on the planet. And that comes from the increased percentage of sales of electric vehicles. And it's these other four rare earth elements that are essential to produce the magnets that go into the electric motors. Those rare earth elements are in reverse order of importance: dysprosium, terbium, praseodymium, and the most important is neodymium. And so it's those four rare earth elements that are arguably most valuable as a group. And those are the ones that are most important for any project that wants to be commercialized.
And like you say, those cleaner and greener set of four are really focused on making those permanent magnets and, making electric motors like the ones that go into the wind turbines, right?
Exactly. And so there's some great video footage out there for example, from Stanley Black & Decker, showing, these rare earth element magnets chasing each other inside of an electric motor. And they're incredibly energy efficient. And so for an example, Tesla originally came to market at really the height of one of the greatest price explosions in any commodity, unless you go back to, tulips in Holland in the 17th century or something. And even then, I'm not quite sure if on a percentage basis, the tulips were valued at a percentage point higher, or the difference between where they got to was higher than rare earth elements. Because in 2010, there was this incident in the market where China, the biggest producer of rare earth elements in 2010, cut off all supplies to Japan, the second largest market. And for an example, dysprosium went from $90 a kilo up to $3,000 per kilo in a matter of months. Ridiculous. But essentially, those four rare earth elements, again, dysprosium, terbium, neodymium, and praseodymium, are essential for the manufacture of the magnets. Back to Tesla. Tesla came to market when the rare earth element prices were extremely high. So they did not use a permanent magnet motor in their drivetrain. They used an AC induction motor to essentially save on the sticker price for the Tesla. But in late 2017, Tesla signed a 3-year deal with a Chinese permanent magnet manufacturer because they were preparing to switch over their drivetrain motors to the permanent magnet motor, which I believe all Teslas are now manufactured with. But the rare earth element prices had fallen back to the point where arguably the DC permanent magnet motor was not just a better motor than the AC induction motor, which it is, but it was also cost effective.
So, Chris, I want to go back to something that you were kind of mentioning there about this Chinese incident, and there seems to be a real overlying theme here about China's control over the rare earth market, let's say. So, can you give us some perspective on the importance of why we need to be developing some more sovereign rare earth projects in safer jurisdictions?
Absolutely. I think the thing about China is that they have really clearly shown themselves to be not dependable source of supply. And this comes from several major instances. The first one actually was back in 2005 when China imposed an export duty on rare earth elements, which was later in 2012 deemed illegal by the World Trade Organization. So that export duty was arguably put in place to drive business and traffic into China to access the cheaper price domestic feedstock. And that did work incredibly well for the Chinese. And at the end of the day, everything arguably that Beijing does, or most of what Beijing does, is to satisfy their population. And this was primarily done arguably to create more downstream manufacturing jobs in the rare earth element sector. And it really worked well because the world's largest rare earth element processor that is not Chinese, which at that time was Rhodia, which is now Rhodia or Solvay Rhodia, they set up 2 processing facilities in China to access that lower price domestic feedstock. In addition, Hitachi, the owner of the dominant recipe for permanent magnets, they set up manufacturing in China. At the same time, understanding that what was probably going to come down the pike and did come down the pike was that essentially the Chinese basically took the recipe. At some point later, there was a conference in Chengdu, I believe, in China, and there was a government official of the Chinese, and he stood up and he said that the Chinese don't recognize any international patents. And it was like, well, okay, glad you stood up and owned it, because everybody assumed that was the case. And so at any rate, that was in 2005. And then in terms of the other event I mentioned, which is generally called the Senkaku boat incident, when the Chinese government basically stopped all shipments of rare earth elements unilaterally to Japan for about 6 weeks. And sure, was that Chinese market manipulation? Maybe. Was it the rest of the world freaking out? Maybe a bit of that. But honestly, the prices went up. Depending upon the rare earth elements, prices went up 1,000%, 2,000%, and in the case of dysprosium, 3,000%. So, if you're a manufacturer of anything outside of China, How are you supposed to deal with that? Oh, I had a profit margin yesterday. It completely was evaporated today. So what I'm trying to say is that 2005, the export duty, 2010, 2011, the Senkaku boat incident, and then the world went into about a 6-year period of significant capital being deployed to see if they could substitute out rare earth elements. And there was really only one success in that 6-year drive in terms of the of rare earth element dependent products. And that was essentially phosphors, which is lighting. So the lighting industry basically concluded that rare earth elements weren't essential to modern lighting. And so that market evaporated for rare earth elements. However, in the magnet world, there was really no success. It was essentially concluded late in 2016 that there were no alternate substitutes to make a really high performance magnet like the rare earth elements. So the whole world kind of agreed, okay, we're going to go back to just focusing on rare earth elements for magnets. And then following that, within 6 months, China jacked up the prices for rare earth elements again. So at a minimum, I would say there are 3 significant episodes over the last 20 years that China has basically shown, if you're depending on us for supply, at some point you're going to get screwed. Excuse me, I hope that's not too offside for your listeners. But the bottom line is that it was really in 2005 that the rest of the world started looking at an alternate source of supply for the rare earth elements. And if anything, that's been something where there's been a huge amount of water under the bridge, very positive advancements in that regard. And this issue potentially came to the forefront of the media under the trade war between the United States and China, and especially when China arguably suggested that it may halt exports of rare earth elements to the United States in May of 2019. That didn't happen, but it did bring it to the forefront. But it's something that already was being worked on by anybody that uses rare earth elements in any of their products.
So in a way, though, Chris, we kind of have to break this down as well, of thinking about it not just in the respect of only supply of, let's say, ore, but as well as production capability and refining capability from China as well. Is that correct? So do we need to basically be able to produce and refine these elements in let's say North America as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I'm happy to say that for the first time, we actually have a rare earth element processor operational in North America, and that's the company in Utah, historically the largest uranium producer in the United States, and that's Energy Fuels. So Energy Fuels CEO raised the rare earth element flag in April of 2020, and within 48 hours, I was on the phone with them. And but in November of 2020, Energy Fuels announced the successful retrofitting of their facility, the White Mesa Mill in Utah, to process rare earth elements. In July of this year, they announced the first shipment of rare earth element concentrate produced at the White Mesa Mill and now being shipped to the Canadian company, Neo Performance Materials facilities in Estonia. And that's a huge, huge announcement. And so, finally, for the first time, North America has a rare earth element processor. The other point I would like to make is that the only rare earth element mine operational in North America is MP Materials, or Mountain Pass in California, right on the eastern border with Nevada there. And the new management running that mine has done, in my book, everything right as well. And they raised $545 million in a SPAC financing last fall, the fall of 2020. And they are currently working to set up their own internal processing so that they do not have to send their material to China, where they have historically been sending it since they brought that mine back into operation in 2017. So yes, all of that is important to have production in North America and processing in North America.
So, are there other opportunities for cooperation and partnership within the supply chain in rare earths to be improved and really streamlined and be able to basically have a top-down structure of producers and manufacturers working together to supply these really needed elements to the market?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that brings to mind another company that was very proactive and reached out to my company 2 years ago, looking for a sample of material with that intent in mind of having, an amount of vertical integration in North America and not being totally dependent upon China. And that is the company Urban Mining in Texas. And Urban Mining are not a miner. Urban Mining are a manufacturer of permanent magnets. They are also the company that received $28.8 million from the U.S. Department of Defense in October last year to build out their facility in San Marcos, Texas. So this is a company that is looking to increase their production of rare earth element permanent magnets, and they do not want to be dependent on sources of feedstock from China. There is a missing piece there, though, to make it clear to you. So the production of rare earth element concentrate in North America is going on at Mountain Pass Materials in California. The processing of rare earth elements is happening at Energy Fuels in Utah. And then a missing piece at this point in time is what is called metallization. So the most appropriate feedstock for urban mining is actually rare earth element metal. In that regard, I would like to mention this UK-based company that we've been in contact with for at least the last 3 years, and they're called Less Common Metals. And Less Common Metals is really the first significant metallization facility outside of China, but they are based in the United Kingdom. But that is also for the West at large a very significant achievement. So there is rare earth elements being produced as feedstock in North America. There are rare earth elements being processed in Utah. There is metallization going on in the UK, and there are magnet manufacturers in the United States. So potentially these links just have to be pulled together, let's say, but this is essentially everybody's shared goal to have this vertically integrated, rare earth element supply chain completely outside of China and without any reliance upon China.
So what is the industry really like in the rare earths, Chris? You and I were talking before the show, and you've mentioned it in the show a little bit about these wild price swings in basically these rare earth elements. Is that because there's no real futures market? And how do the producers really get the feedstock that they need, the consumers get the feedstock that they need to produce whatever it is they're going to produce?
Yeah, no, I don't think there are futures. I think it's essentially just a very active spot market. I'm sure there are, some form of long-term contracts that no one would know unless you were a signatory to that contract. I can say that we have had an association for 6 years with the gentleman that's probably the most experienced rare earth element trader that speaks English, and he's a Japanese man by the name of Kazuo Machida, and he's been working in rare earth elements for 40 years plus, and we subscribe to a rare earth element price service out of Beijing. I receive at least a weekly report from them. Our associate Kaz says those prices are accurate as to the transactions that are going on now. But essentially, if you want to buy rare earth elements, there are other metals traders besides our associate. But apparently these prices that do get reported and the crazy price fluctuations are real. So and on a percentage basis, it really is quite surprising how much these prices can fluctuate over time.
So if we look at let's say the junior mining sector within the rare earth community, let's say, Is it possible that they are one of the best values left within the mining sector right now, considering how little attention they really get?
I would agree with that. The rare earth elements as a commodity themselves, I've had a couple of situations occur that I think for a lot of investors have clouded the image of rare earth elements. Let me be really clear. There was the major Molycorp, and they came to market right after the Senkaku boat incident, and they essentially very successfully rode this incredible wave of high prices. And they did an IPO, I think, at $12 a share, and within 6 months or so, they were trading at $76 a share. That would have been in 2011, and by June of 2015, they were bankrupt. So I don't want to lay more blame on that company, but essentially that was a huge destroyer of capital, as also rare earth element prices naturally fell from these ridiculous, unsustainable highs. So both of those factors, I think, kind of cloud investors' appreciation of rare earth elements and rare earth element juniors. There is another additional factor I should add into that, which is rare earth elements themselves. They're called rare because there are so few projects that have positive economics. And this is because of the specifics of the commodity being able to be contained, hosted in so many different minerals. And out of approximately 150 minerals, there are only 4 rare earth element bearing minerals that have ever been commercialized. And so this is an additional problem that your listeners may understand in terms of nickel, like you would much rather have a massive sulfide like Voisey's Bay instead of a laterite, as you might only find is economic in a third world country. Times that by what? I don't know, 100. So rare earth elements can be hosted in 150 different minerals, but only 4 have ever been commercialized. So that's another additional factor in terms of realizing the complexity or the challenges, I would say, in looking at rare earth elements.
So in a way, you have to be a real expert or have some type of, let's say, edge in analyzing juniors or projects in this space?
Yes, or you could just ask the simple question, what mineral is this project hosted by? And I would say that most rare earth element juniors these days are being, if they have the right minerals, they are being very forthright with that fact. We're hosted by monazite, we're hosted by bastnasite. And those 2 minerals essentially dominate commercial production of rare earth elements. One of the ones that only would account for maybe 10% of global production, maybe 15%, is a mineral called xenotime. But as you can see, I mean, there's a lot of names that may be uncommon to everybody. The 4 rare earth elements that are essential for magnets. And now I have to think about the different minerals that would be the host mineral for specific projects. But it instead of knowing all of the names of the 150 that aren't commercially processed, if you just look to a junior and say, well, are they monazite dominant or bastnasite dominant or xenotime dominant? And you get an answer on that, that will certainly guide you very, I would say, potentially successfully down the road to what is a project that has an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So if we look at the VanEck Rare Earths ETF, Chris, it's up over 150% in the last year alone. So how do you see the explanation for this? Is it that the market could be overheated and overbought at the moment, or is this rise due to the weighting of some of the particular companies in this ETF?
I think it is actually a really good indicator of continued increased global demand of rare earth elements. And I don't know every one of the companies on the VanEck ETF at this moment off the top of my head, but I would still suggest that there's nobody on there that is overvalued. I would say, if anything, this is just the beginning of the realization of the continued increased demand for rare earth elements to achieve that, that future that we want for planet Earth. You know, one of the things I often mention or have mentioned is that if you didn't wake up the next day after the world's biggest IPO in the fall of 2019 and realize that the day of fossil fuel is coming to an end, and that was the IPO of Saudi Aramco, you know, I don't know what you're looking at. Because, you know, when Saudi Aramco management says they believe they need to diversify, seriously, what are they saying? You know, they realize, you know, whether, I mean, I think their date for peak oil was something crazy like 2035. And it's like, seriously, 2035 is like a decade after lots of European countries have already made it illegal to drive an internal combustion engine vehicle, like Norway, I believe, is 2024. At any rate, around the board table in Riyadh, I'm pretty sure they're thinking, you know, 2025, maybe at the outer limits for peak oil. And so, you know, them IPOing the company in 2019, I think that's a clear indicator. This is where the world is going. The trajectory has been set. And I think the VanEck, a rare earth element ETF, is a good indicator of the beginning of that opportunity that all investors should at least take a look at.
So, Chris, when we think about bringing rare earth deposits into production, what type of considerations does a company need to think about? Is it any more difficult to get, let's say, permitting for this style of mine versus a precious metals deposit? Do you know?
No. And, you know, you bring up an important point, which is often confused, which is that that rare earth element mining itself is somehow more environmentally degrading than mining any other commodity. That is not true. There are great examples and lots of media on the very harmful historical extractive and processing practices that were conducted, especially in China. And Beijing has done, in my humble estimation, a very good job, and also very quietly, in shutting down those projects. And the 5-year plan between 2010 and 2015 was actually called the Green Plan. So the current president of China, Xi Jinping, was installed in November of 2012, midpoint of the 5-year Green Plan. And if anything, he increased Beijing's activity in shutting down these harmful environmental practices. I don't expect China to be remediating these sites or anything, but at least they are not continuing to process in these very harmful ways. So those same harmful extractive and processing practices, they're not allowed in the West. And so to answer your question, no, there aren't any additional difficulties with permitting or constructing a rare earth element mine over any other commodity. The other thing I would mention that some rare earth element projects, or I should say all rare earth element projects, must address is what and which radioactive elements they have naturally in the deposit. There are, it will either be uranium and thorium, or uranium mostly. In the case of our deposit, we're very happy it's just very low thorium and no uranium. So that is a consideration depending upon where your project is and where you want to process it. So all I'll say as well is that in Canada, what is arguably going to be the first rare earth element processor in Canada is going to be at the Saskatchewan Research Council in Saskatoon. And since they're in Saskatchewan, since they're in Canada, which historically was the world's largest producer of uranium, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? All of the rules, the regulations, and the guidelines are well in place for handling any radioactive material produced in Canada or elsewhere. And secondly, Energy Fuels, being historically the largest uranium producer in the United States, they can also handle and process out uranium, or thorium. So that's not an issue. But basically, all rare earth element projects do have some radioactive element. But again, still, many projects have radioactive elements. And to be honest, for over the last decade, Energy Fuels' business plan was really being a service provider to anybody from any other mined commodity who found that they had a radioactive element in their feedstock, nickel, lead, zinc, whatever. If you found, I've got some uranium in it, what am I going to do with it? I don't have the permits to store the uranium or the thorium in my tailings or my waste facility. Let's send it to Energy Fuels, because those guys do. And so that was essentially their stock and trade for a long period of time. So outside of that, no, there aren't any additional complexities or problems related to permitting a rare earth element project.
And as you were mentioning, some of the permitting process in Canada, is that seemingly, very advantageous in certain jurisdictions, like let's say the Ashram project, for example? Explain to us the permitting process and how that might be actually quite streamlined.
Well, thank you for the question, because Nunavik is essentially the top third of La Belle Province, Quebec. And Quebec is a great mining jurisdiction, only taken out of the top spot by the Fraser's Institute for a reason that only affects projects in the southern 2/3 of Quebec. But even then, I would argue that that's not a major consideration. In general, I think Quebec is a great mining jurisdiction. Canada is a great mining jurisdiction. But Nunavik arguably is the best, because what they have in Nunavik and have had for decades is called the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. And this is a very streamlined mechanism, set of rules and regulations for advancing a mining project. And so we benefit from being in Nunavik with this James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, just maybe go over what some of the, let's say, the considerations and what makes that such a streamlined process, and what they require that that makes that jurisdiction so advantageous over others.
Right. Well, I think, essentially what they do is they lay out all of the steps in terms of, and very importantly, in terms of achieving the social license to operate, in terms of building a relationship, reaching out to the dominant social group, which are the Inuit, which we have done. And we're very happy to have a letter of intent that was signed by the two dominant Inuit corporations 2 years ago. And that would be the Makivik Corporation, which handles essentially the business interests of the Inuit, and then what is called the Niumivik Landholding Corporation, which handles other interests of the Inuit community. So essentially, the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement sets out those steps to achieve, to reach out, to work with the dominant social group, the Inuit. It also establishes very clearly the requirements to do all of the environmental work to finally produce and submit an environmental social impact assessment, which is needed across Canada. But we've been collecting that environmental data for years and years and years for its eventual inclusion in the ESIA, which we will start in early 2022, because you need to actually have a pre-feasibility study before you work on the ESIA itself. But all of these steps to advance the mining project are very well set out in the agreement.
So really, it's just a very easy and good way of laying out the requirements that you guys have to meet. Exactly.
Yeah, it's the most codified, streamlined, modern mechanism, essentially, with all of the rules and the regulations to advance an exploration project into development and hopefully then into production.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, Chris. Well, I really appreciate you explaining all of the intricacies of the rare earth market to us here. Is there anything that we should maybe go over before we wrap up?
Let me see. It's a pleasure speaking to you today, Tom. And I do think there's a huge opportunity in rare earth elements. They are I'm often included on panels of technology metals or electric metals. And of course, I have lots of friends in the industry working on lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel projects, and those are all essential to the clean and green future we're all looking to have success on, as we're facing not just climate change right now, but it seems to me a climate crisis with wildfires burning and floods, et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line is that rare earth elements are probably the rarest in terms of the projects that have standard aspects and that will be able to advance. So I don't want to be too self-serving on that, but that's certainly a point I did want to make.
Excellent, Chris. Of course, if there's anybody that wants to check out your guys' website, it's commerceresources.com, and they can reach out if they have any questions through there, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom.
Chris, thanks so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.